All right, so this time is just flying by. Every single time, I'm always surprised how fast these weeks go by. We're already on week 7, believe it or not. So this week we're going to be talking about advocacy, and kind of going hand in hand with advocacy is also self-advocacy. So we'll talk about both of them today and how they sort of interact with each other and how they affect one another with the clients that we're working with. So I always like to start with the definition. This is just our basic definition, and then I definitely want to get your guys' input if you want to add to it. But our sort of basic definition of advocacy is somebody getting support from another person to help express their views and wishes, help stand up for their rights. And somebody who does that, somebody who helps in that way, is considered to be an advocate. But I wanted to get more specific, like as it applies to case management or as it applies to therapy, social services. Do you want to add anything, or does anything else come up for you when we mention the word advocacy? You can either unmute or you can just go ahead and share in the chat, either way. Basically, what advocacy means, to you, if it's different than what you see up here on the screen.
For me, I personally feel like this kind of covers all of like how it means to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. If you want to add anything, or if anything comes up for you, like, oh yeah, that's a part of advocacy, please, either put it in the chat or go ahead and unmute and share. This is kind of a general, very basic definition. I think case management has some unique facets to it when it comes to advocacy. So maybe as we go, some other things will come up for you as far as what it is specific to case management.
Sometimes
yeah,
advocacy is not, you're not being supported by a lot of the team when you're speaking up for your individual, depending on where the team is and how young or old or how long the team's been together.
Okay. So maybe like kind of what you're describing is like standing up for what's right, even if other people don't agree.
Correct.
Okay.
Or what the individual wants.
Uh-huh.
And maybe some people say, maybe, well, that might be a problem. Rights versus responsibilities a lot of times.
Yeah. So like supporting the client, like almost no matter what, if that's
Correct.
what they want. Okay, that's a great point to make. Yeah, very good. All right, very good. Thank you guys. Appreciate you guys sharing. So as far as our Ohio Administrative Code, I always have to mention that every single time because it does govern, what we do and how we do it. What that looks like for case management is advocacy and also self-advocacy allows the TBS specialist to advocate for the client, basically when the client is unable to do it for themselves because of their symptoms of mental illness. Could also look like providing outreach through CPST services to ensure that the client rights are protected. So there may be some work that needs to be done before you even get to that point. We may need to educate the client on what their rights even are. They may not even know or be aware of what their rights are. So sometimes, like I say every week, those 10 interventions very much interlap on top of, or interact upon one another and overlap upon each other. And sometimes some work needs to be done before we can engage in kind of a more complicated, more advanced intervention of advocacy. So may need to give some psychoeducation or just some education in general about rights first before we go into the advocacy mode. Continuing with information from our Ohio Administrative Code, there really does need to be that barrier of mental health in order for us to interact with any of the interventions that we provide. It needs to be a clear barrier that their mental health symptoms are preventing them from advocating for themselves, because we don't want to speak for people. We don't want to put words in their mouth, but at certain times, people's ability to effectively communicate, think clearly, convey what their needs and their wants are, or negotiate or assert their own interests could be diminished because of their mental health symptoms. And that's really when TBSs may step in and advocate for the person until they are able to speak up for themselves and communicate their own issue or their own interests to others. So that's really, I think, where the mental health symptoms really come into play, is it being a barrier, so that we are not speaking for somebody, we're just speaking on their behalf until they're able to do it for themselves. So that all comes from the Ohio Administrative Code as to what advocacy looks like according to, kind of policy and procedure. Let's get into some whys as to why this might occur, or, why it is valuable to case management. We have a couple ideas of our own that we came up with when creating this curriculum. And then here in a minute, I definitely want to get your guys' input as to why you think advocacy is valuable or can be important to treatment. So some things we came up with as to why it's important is that clients who develop a greater understanding of their own needs gain confidence to recognize their abilities. So this is again related to the SNAP assessment: strengths, needs, abilities, and preferences, and then taking it a step further and advocating to help a client get those needs met, or speaking up about what their preferences are, or communicating, what would they need to be successful. So as we do this with our client, hopefully this allows them to set realistic goals for themselves, and they'll have a better chance of enjoying life, kind of despite having their mental health diagnosis. So we can sort of picture advocacy also as an intervention to help clients learn more about themselves, to really explore and brainstorm and identify their strengths, needs, abilities, and preferences. And doing so maybe can help clarify a goal as we're doing this. Maybe the goal is also then to eventually learn how to advocate on their own behalf, or to self-advocate. So before we watch this video, I just want to check in with you guys and see if you have any whys, or even if you have a quick story to share about how advocacy had a positive impact on the client that you were working with. I think that would be interesting to hear from you guys. What have you seen? Why is it beneficial?
At one of my facilities, we had a client whose room needed renovated, and they were talking about moving her to a different room. And she had a stroke several years back, so one side of her body she can't use as well as the other side. In the new room, the layout was switched, so like the bathroom bar where she used to get herself up in the bathroom was on the side that was opposite, which was the side that's not good for her. And she was frustrated and trying to express this with the LTC staff, and was her anxiety and frustration was getting in the way of her communicating this. So with the help of one of the TBS and me, we were able to actually help her explain to the staff why she had such an issue with the moving of the room, and they were completely understandable, and they actually ended up switching her to a better room that was more accessible for her. And then afterwards, that she expressed feeling so relieved. She was like, I just couldn't communicate what I wanted to. So that was really helpful for her.
That's great. That's a great example. That's a perfect example, actually, of the mental health barrier being there, them being unable to communicate that, us stepping in, maybe demonstrating some advocacy skills. And, who knows, at some point, once those symptoms have decreased, maybe they would then be able to do that for themselves. That's a great way to role model advocacy or self-advocacy. Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate that. That was a good example. Anybody else before we watch this very quick video? Examples of how advocacy was valuable? Okay. All right, well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that, Courtney. We do have a really quick video. I think it's 1.5 minutes that I think illustrates advocacy even better than I can sit here and explain it to you. So we'll watch this quick video and then I'll check in with you on the other side.
What is advocacy? Advocacy means empowering people to have a voice, speaking for them when they can't, and supporting them to speak for themselves when they can. An advocate can support someone in many different ways. An advocate can help a person to speak up for themselves or give their views. An advocate can help a person to understand the process they are going through, their rights, and what choices are available to them. An advocate can help a person to be part of an important decision being made about them. An advocate can help a person to prepare for and take part in meetings and tribunals. An advocate can help a person to raise queries and concerns. An advocate can help a person to access information in the format that is most suitable. An advocate can help a person to access services that support them. Advocates can also provide information and signposts to other helpful services. For more information about advocacy and services available, please visit www.power.net.
Okay, I just like that. It was real quick, but I think it illustrates probably, like I said, even better than I can explain, what does it look like and kind of the different aspects of advocacy. Again, I saw elements of education in there. I saw elements of coordination, getting materials in a language that the person understands. So it's kind of that outreach idea that we were talking about in the very beginning, that also I think is part of advocacy. So before we go into self-advocacy, I just wanted to see if there's anything else people wanted to share or anything that came up for you about advocacy before we sort of move away from it, but go into self-advocacy.
I actually had a very recent, I've done a lot of advocacy, but this one was unique. I had a woman that had been on my caseload for about a year. Her husband died last August, and she'd been steadily declining since then. And she's on dialysis. And she had been telling, and since then I had gone to a supervisor, and she had gotten another TBS, but I still stayed in touch with her, and she had told my team member that she wanted to see me. So we went in there and I saw her, and she told us that she was having a really hard time. She didn't know how to tell her daughters that she didn't want to do dialysis anymore.
Mm.
And that she needed us to help her let them know, because she was just, her anxiety wouldn't allow her to tell them that, because they had just lost their dad.
Mm-hmm.
So so I did, I advocated for her and let them know that as much as she had been telling them what she thought they wanted to hear, which wasn't at all the case. They wanted for her what she wanted, and they knew how tired she was. So she quit dialysis, and she died on Mother's Day.
Wow.
But out of all the different kinds of advocacy I've done, since being a part of ViaQuest, all different kinds of advocacy, that's the most unique one, was to advocate for someone to be able to choose to end their life.
Wow.
And she did, and it was beautiful.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
She was surrounded by everybody she loved.
Yeah, that was, her choice to make. Thankfully you were there to help her communicate that in the moment. That's a great example. Thank you. Thank you, Deanne. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, advocacy can look very different. It can look like many different things. It doesn't look just like one thing. That's just, one example of something that it could take form of. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Okay, so sometimes people need us to advocate for them. Other times, maybe after role modeling, role playing, practice, skill building, education, all of those other interventions, somebody might be able to self-advocate, for themselves. So depending on their needs, You know, like this person who was going or didn't want to go through dialysis, they needed somebody else to advocate for them. But other people, once things have improved, symptoms have decreased, functioning is improved, the hope is clients would be able to engage in self-advocacy, you know, on their own behalf. So let's talk about kind of the differences and similarities between advocacy and self-advocacy, because they are related, but they are also quite different. The definition we're going to go with is that self-advocacy is the action of representing oneself or one's views or interests. So kind of just, I got that megaphone there for a reason. You're kind of speaking up for yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that they still might not need support, or they still might need practice or education to do so, but essentially they are the ones speaking on their behalf with support from others. So that is our definition of self-advocacy that we're going to use. I have another video. This one's a little bit longer. This is about 6 minutes. But this is another just a great example, real life example of somebody who engaged in self-advocacy and how that impacted her life. This young lady is actually from Dayton, I believe. So she's from Ohio. So keep it local here for our example. Let's hear what she has to say about self-advocacy, and then we'll touch base again on the other side.
And speaking about being a grown-up in America, Abby Edwards is a senior at Butler, and she has already completed more college than most of us in the room through Wright State. So, please welcome Abby Edwards and her dog, Kathy, with a K, to the stage.
So how is everybody? We're more than halfway through. How are we feeling? You still excited to be here? Yeah! Well, I'm still excited to be here because my name, as Sam very eloquently said, is Abby Edwards, and I am here today to share with you the impact that self-advocacy can have on your life. Now, when most people think of self-advocacy, they think that it's just a way to get something done. When I thought of self-advocacy, I envisioned something dramatic, like a petition, like someone in Washington. I didn't know that self-advocacy could be as simple as sending an email. It wasn't until I was asked to speak about it that I realized what self-advocacy really is, a choice to take control of your life. Now that's all well and good. If it's so simple, why haven't we all done it? Maybe it's because we don't feel like it's our choice to make. We live in a world that is constantly changing. New technology and trends come out all the time, and it can give us the impression that we don't really have a say in what goes on in the world around us. I can personally relate to feeling out of control. Around 4.5 years ago, I was at a point in my life where I felt like I had no say over what happened to me. At this point, I had just lost the remainder of my vision, had just had major back surgery, and was going through a second round of IV treatments for osteoporosis. This was a time in my life where I felt like everything had been taken out of my hands. Just before my freshman year of high school, I started exploring the role that technology could have in my life. I began to utilize things like email to communicate with my teachers and to complete assignments. At some point that year, I became aware of all the opportunities that had been opened up to me, and I made the choice to embrace all that life had to offer. With renewed confidence, I communicated with admissions staff at Wright State, and then, my sophomore year, with my first ever college professors. As my confidence continued to grow, I decided to apply for a guide dog. I was approved by Guiding Eyes for the Blind and spent a life-changing summer training with my guide dog, Kathy, in New York. I got more than just a dog that summer, though. I got even more confidence because now I was able to not just talk confidently, but also to walk confidently. I carried this confidence into my junior year, and when I was having trouble in one of my psychology classes at Wright State, I was able to confidently speak with the dean of the department to resolve my problem. Everyone around me noticed how confident I felt, so my school district nominated me for a National Self-Advocacy Award. As a result of receiving this award, I was able to be a guest on a radio show, a local newscast, and had several opportunities to speak for different civic groups. Last summer, as a result of advocating for myself, I attended an independent living program that taught me invaluable skills like cooking, cleaning, things that will last me a lifetime. Looking back, I realized that it was my choice to take control of my life those 4.5 years ago that has led me to where I am today. Now, thus far, you've been sitting back listening to my story thinking, gosh, this is nice, I don't have to do anything. So this is where I would like to extend a challenge to everyone here today to come up with at least one thing that you would like to see change in your life. Ask yourself, what can I do to accomplish this? Then realize that you have the power to make that goal a reality. You will find out, as I once did, that once you start advocating for yourself, it gets easier and easier to accomplish bigger and bigger goals. Consider the impact that simply deciding to take control of your life could have on you and those around you. And don't just think of self-advocacy as a way to get things done. Think of it as a state of mind, one that will take you as far as you can imagine. Thank you.
Okay, I love that video. I think that is like almost a perfect example of self-advocacy. You're going to see here in a minute that she went through all of the steps of self-advocacy that we're about to go through on a handout here in a moment. So she, sort of her life, I think, was a good representation of these handouts that I find for you. So she matched up perfectly with that. But any reactions or any comments that you guys want to make about Abby? We're going to come back to her as we go through the handouts, but any initial reactions to Abby? Okay, all right, well, we'll talk about her as we go here. Go through the handout. So I'm kind of getting more specific about advocacy versus self-advocacy. In self-advocacy, the client is learning to make decisions and choices that affect their lives so they can be more independent, like Abby. However, as a TBS, how you can support your client to do that is to educate them about their rights. And I think it was Andy who said, along with learning about rights, also kind of come responsibilities. So there is many skills, many opportunities to educate, and many ways that TBS can support a client to learn self-advocacy skills and everything that goes along with it. So let's talk about some characteristics, some like personal attributes that are required for somebody to be a good self-advocate. And to me, this just like embodies Abby in that quick 5-minute video that we just saw. But people who are good self-advocates are aware of their personal preferences, their interests, their strengths, and their limitations. They're able to differentiate between wants and needs. They have the ability to make choices based on those preferences, interests, wants, and needs. They have the ability to consider multiple options and to kind of anticipate consequences for their decisions. And really, just like Abby, they have the ability to initiate and take action when needed. So again, your person may not come to you with all of these developed characteristics, but it can certainly be something that they work on with you, or skills that they learn, or questions that you can ask about, their strengths, their interests, their limitations, or sort of draw that information out from them. So this is handout 7.1. I'm just going to summarize handout 7.1. Please read it in more detail to get the full information of this self-advocacy idea. But some other characteristics required to be a good self-advocate is the ability to evaluate decisions based on outcomes of previous decisions, and then to revise future decisions accordingly. So just kind of from Abby's story, she didn't go out and try to get technology to help her communicate and send emails to her professors and get herself that guide dog and go to that independent living program like in one day. She did sort of the first step, and then she did the next step and kind of built up along the way over time. So, sort of, it sounds like based on the initial, asking through the email or setting up meetings with her professors, and then moving forward, because of those decisions, she was able to kind of make future decisions accordingly based on how things went in the past. So she's definitely setting and working towards her goals. She demonstrated really great problem solving skills. She just really embodies all of these things, striving for independence while recognizing interdependence on others, ability to self-regulate behavior, and really what we're talking about are self-evaluation skills that is needed to be a good self-advocate. So this is a very advanced skill. This is also a very active skill. A couple minutes ago when we were talking about advocacy, that's more of a passive occurrence where we're allowing somebody else to speak on our behalf. Even though we did communicate, our needs and our preference, we're allowing somebody else to speak for us. Self-advocacy, on the other hand, is much more taking ownership, of myself, taking ownership sort of my destiny. So there is very, very much that difference in being passive versus being active when it comes to advocacy versus self-advocacy. A couple more kind of personal characteristics required: independent performance and adjustment skills, definitely persistence, to keep following up in the face of adversity, ability to use their good communication skills, such as negotiation, compromise, persuasion to reach their goals. They're assuming that responsibility, like Andy was talking about, for their actions and decisions. They have self-confidence, and they're usually creative, such as thinking up accommodations that may help them get their needs met depending on what their setting is. So these, again, will be worked on and kind of mastered as the client is learning self-advocacy skills. They may not come to you with all of these in place. So just to kind of show the interdependence between all of these concepts that we've kind of talked about, we have this nice graphic. This is also on the handout that I emailed to you, 7.1, to sort of show the interaction between being self-aware of one's interests, strengths, needs, responsibilities, and how that interplays with their ability to communicate those strengths, those needs, those abilities. Also requires some knowledge of rights. What can I ask for? What's within my rights to request? And I think that leadership idea at the very end was sort of how Abby ended her speech, where she not only, is advocating for herself, but she's now inspiring and, requesting other people to also self-advocate or stand up for themselves. So she now is even a leader, I would say. So those are just some great characteristics for self-advocacy that I think were very well demonstrated in Abby's speech. So really what it boils down to is people who self-advocate know their own needs. They have the confidence to recognize their abilities. They recognize, accept, and understand their needs and abilities before they go out and ask for other things, or before they self-advocate, in a more public forum. So again, I'm not reading this entire handout to you. Please reference it maybe after class, but that is the kind of general overview of characteristics required for somebody to be a good self-advocate. We're also going to talk about kind of what self-advocacy is not. Self-advocacy is not having all the answers and knowing everything just kind of naturally, but a good, effective self-advocate is a person who asks questions and engages in creative problem solving. So this is also kind of where the TBS can support the client to learn problem solving strategies for sure. So how it kind of breaks it down on this handout is thinking about the what, the who, the when, the where, and the how as it relates to problem solving and self-advocacy. So definitely a place where a TBS can support a client to learn some answers to the questions that they have. So we'll start with the what. When it comes to problem solving and self-advocacy, you can definitely, as a TBS, support your client to identify what they need to know or what they need to receive from others in order to accomplish their goal. This is really brainstorming, asking good questions to find out what exactly they need. This also, to me, is setting specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, or realistic and time-related objectives as a good way to sort of plan the steps that a person needs to take to meet that long-term goal. Since you've been specific about what they want to accomplish, that kind of sets the plan forward on how to achieve it. I would totally agree with this, that setting effective goals not only increases a person's motivation, but allows sort of measuring progress along the way and helps to sort of self-correct behavior as they are trying to reach that goal. So real important to be specific, make sure your client is able to name and describe what they want to accomplish clearly. Also be clear in your own mind as the person supporting them on what it is that we're working towards so that we can be sure to get there. So that is the what that we're working on. Also important is the who. Almost who do we need to go to get our questions answered? Who is most likely to have what that client needs? Who has the power to grant that person's request or the ability to provide it for their client? It could be you, or maybe you're linking the client with that person who could help them to get their needs met. So take some time to find out who on your person's care team is most likely to be knowledgeable and helpful when it comes to your client needs, or maybe we're even going outside of the care team. So think about the nurses, the therapists, the doctors, program managers, or do we need a referral to another program or another provider to get that need met? I think of this as kind of barking up the right tree. So for example, maybe your client talks to their dietary aide, just as an example, that dietary aide is a good listener and listens to the client talk about the negative side effects that they're having about their medication. And that's great that that dietary aide is willing to listen to them, but that dietary aide has no control over getting them a new prescription or changing their medication. So we kind of have to bark up the right tree to get the person heard and to have those needs potentially met and recognized. Also important to talk about when. When is it most effective and appropriate for your client to raise an issue? So this is kind of a social skill that you may be teaching to your client to encourage them to think about when is it the best time to approach others when they're able to give your client their full attention so they could self-advocate rather than when that person is multitasking or interacting with somebody else. So definitely social cues may need to be taught. Maybe we're teaching our client to ask for what they want and then also ask if this is a good time for them to talk to that person about it now, or would they prefer to do so later? Most people appreciate being given a choice. And maybe brainstorm with your client situations like, when is it acceptable to interrupt somebody to self-advocate? When is it better to wait? When is it okay to draw attention to your feelings and opinions? And when is it considered kind of impolite or disruptive, to kind of set them up for success, to really be heard when they are self-advocating. So timing is also thinking about when is the best time to approach somebody else, but it also wants to look at when is it the best time for your person, for your client to speak up. Think about, is your person a morning person or are they a night owl? Do they first need to have their coffee or their meal or a nap before they are ready to approach and communicate with somebody else best? So we want to set people up for success even when we're thinking about when to do so. Also think about where. Location can also impact how somebody is heard when they're self-advocating. Want to choose a place where your client feels comfortable. Talk with your client. Is this an issue that you should raise to self-advocate around other people? Or is this something to be talked about in private? Where would they be comfortable talking about this? Who would they be comfortable talking about it in front of? Just as an example, maybe your client doesn't want to have a long personal conversation standing in a busy hallway in a crowded common area, but they would be okay having that private conversation in an office or in an activities room. So here it comes coordination, on your part as a TBS to find that location or reserve that location to make sure that your client is comfortable as they are advocating for themselves. Want to think about how is the person advocating for themselves? How do they best express themselves in both stressful and comfortable situations? When advocating for themselves, think about also how much detail and how much information your client should share with others as they are self-advocating, maybe even role-playing that with their client to gauge what they're comfortable sharing, what they're not comfortable sharing with others. This is a great way that TBS can teach or model for their client, the amount of information that is appropriate, or what do people need to know in order for them to advocate for themselves. So plan ahead for these types of things. The example that I have is if your client has a lot of anxiety about making phone calls, but something needs to be fixed in their apartment, could we maybe send an email or could they text their landlord to still advocate, for themselves to get their shower fixed or whatever, but to do so in a way that they are comfortable, that they are able to do it for themselves. Or if they do have to make a phone call, could we come up with a list of questions before they make the phone call? Or could we practice what they want to say in that phone call before they make it? So really, again, it boils down to setting people up for success, planning ahead, practicing, learning maybe some social skills or other skills before a person actually engages in the self-advocacy. So that's the handout 7.1 that really, I think, breaks down what is needed to be a good self-advocate. And I think also shows TBSs how they could support a client to self-advocate. Any questions on that sort of advocacy strategy, self-advocacy strategies before we go on to our other handouts? Does this sound like stuff you guys could do or maybe have done with your clients? Okay, I see some heads nodding. That's good. Okay, so our other handout, our other intervention that directly relates to self-advocacy is using I statements. Now, you may have heard of I statements before. Today, we're going to be looking at them sort of as they apply to self-advocacy. So this is handout 7.2. We'll talk about what they are and kind of how they can be used to self-advocate. So if you've never heard of an I statement, that's okay. I'll tell you all about them. I statements are a way of communicating that focuses on the feelings, the beliefs of the speaker, rather than blaming the listener or attributing characteristics to the listener, sort of speaking up just from your own perspective, just from your own point of view. So your clients may definitely self-advocate through the use of I statements. There's different formulas for I statements. The basic formula is just simply, I feel blank emotion when this situation happens. Once people get really good at the basic I feel when, they can then add on a because. So sometimes, I feel angry when you're late coming home because I get worried. That's more of an advanced I statement. And then probably the most advanced I statement is I feel when, because, and then communicating what you need. So I feel angry when you come home late because I'm afraid that you got into a car accident. I need you to tell me if you're going to be late. That's kind of the most complicated version of an I statement. But no matter which kind you're using, even if it's just the basic, I feel when, all I statements really enable people to be assertive without making an accusation, which oftentimes can make the listener feel defensive. I statements help people foster positive communication in their relationships, help them to feel confident, I would say, and stronger when they're sharing their feelings and thoughts, because they're doing so in a very honest and open manner, can help them to grow closer to others on an emotional level. And I statements, just by their design, naturally cause the speaker to take responsibility for their own thoughts and feelings, like I said earlier, rather than blaming others, sometimes falsely or unfairly, pointing the finger at somebody else. So they're just really talking about themselves, is what an I statement is. This is how I see things. This is how I feel in this particular situation. So how you might teach this to a client. This is handout 7.3. I like this because it's pictures and words. Is to first tell the person how have your client tell the person how they're feeling when they're in a particular situation. If they're ready for it, they can add the because, kind of the rationale for their feeling. And then again, if they're ready for it, asking for what they need by filling in the blank. Please call me if you're going to be late. So let's practice this. Practice, practice, practice. This is handout 7.4. You can also certainly use this with a client. So again, I statements take responsibility for one's own feelings while still tactfully describing a problem. So instead of blaming, in that first example, you can't keep coming home so late, it's so inconsiderate. A way to restate that in an I statement would be instead, I feel worried when you come home late, I can't even sleep. Another blaming example might be, you never call me, I guess we just won't talk anymore. A way to restate that in an I statement is, I feel hurt when you go so long without calling. I'm afraid that you don't care. So I'm going to ask 3 of you to volunteer for each of these scenarios and let me know a possible way, there's, more than one answer for each of these, to restate these scenarios using an I statement. So the first one is a friend always cancels plans at the last minute. Recently, you were waiting for them at a restaurant when they called to say they couldn't make it. So instead of blaming, what might be a way to communicate how you would feel if that happened to you? Any brave soul?
Well,
Yeah.
I've actually had this happen quite a lot. Not like waiting at a restaurant, but I've had people cancel on me last minute all the time. So I would just say probably like I feel hurt when you like cancel last minute. I feel like you don't care, you don't take it so seriously, and just letting them know like I need you to kind of communicate a little bit better to me.
Great. Yeah, so you did the whole thing. You did the I feel because, and then you also said what you needed. So extra credit for you, Stephanie. Very good. Excellent. Let's try the other scenario. You're working on a group project and one member is not completing their portion. You have repeatedly had to finish their work. That's a tough one. How would you make an I statement without blaming? Somebody besides.
You can always say something along the lines of like, I feel frustrated that I'm doing this by myself, or what feels like I'm doing this by myself. I need a little bit more input from you and a little bit more assistance on, working on this project.
Very good. Yeah, you also threw the last I need in there. Very good. Thank you, Rebecca. All right, one more. The scenario is your boss keeps dumping new work on you with little instruction and not enough time. Despite working overtime, you're weeks behind. How might you say an I feel statement about that to your supervisor? A little bit different when it's your supervisor, huh? Might want to be framing it a little bit differently.
How about, I feel like you don't realize how much time it takes to complete the tasks you're giving me. And I feel as though you don't value my input when not communicating with me and finding out where I am in the last task you gave me before putting a new one on. And I need better communication.
Okay, that's great. No, that's a great example. Very good. So you guys kind of get it's really a formula. It's almost like a mathematical formula. I feel emotion when situation. For extra credit, you can explain the because rationale, and then even more extra credit is what do you need kind of going forward. So great job. Oop. So yeah, there's that basic formula. I have a quick poll. I'm just going to have everybody give me one I statement, if I can find my polls. Yep, there they are. Just to make sure, because I only heard from 3 of you. I want to make sure everybody has the idea here. Oh, my survey, where is it? There it is. Okay, looks like I got to copy the link into the chat. That's okay, we can do it that way. There's more than one way to make it work. All right, so I'll put the link to the chat, or the link to the quiz. I mean the poll in the chat. Let's see if it works that way. Are you guys able to click on that and get the poll to work in the chat? For some reason, it wasn't coming up under polls.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, cool. Okay, anybody willing to share their I feel statement? Maybe somebody that I haven't heard from for the first examples. I feel feeling when. You can just do the basic one. You don't have to do the advanced one if you don't want to. Anybody? Just a quick I feel.
I'll share mine. Mine was a little bit longer, but if I remember everything that I said, I think I said like I don't feel appreciated when you show up late because like it makes me feel like you don't take into consideration our plans. And I think I put like I need more communication when something arises, something like that.
Okay, very good. Very good. Good example. All right, anyone else?
I didn't really remember mine word for word, but I said I feel overwhelmed when given multiple tasks to do at a certain amount of time because I feel rushed. And I said I would feel better if I were given more time to complete the task.
Very good. That's very specific. Very good being specific about what you need. Excellent. Okay, thank you guys. Appreciate that. All right, let's wrap up I statements and then we'll get on to our documentation scenario. So just a kind of a note to wrap up I statements. Check in with your clients on how this is going. This is, as you kind of figure it out, it's a little bit of an awkward way of communicating. We don't usually walk around saying, I feel this way, or I feel that way when you do this, or at least a lot of people don't do it. So it may be different for them. It may be an adjustment for them to communicate in a new way. So check in with them, maybe practice it a couple times, multiple sessions may be needed in order for them to get really good at using I statements, and then also, be sure to link it back to any other skills that they might need as they're learning self-advocacy. So good job. Thank you guys. I appreciate you participating in I feel statements. So the last handout we're going to talk about is handout 7.5. Self-advocacy when it comes to a person's healthcare, or self-advocacy when it comes to going to a doctor's appointment. Sometimes people are scared to ask questions or scared to speak up for themselves. So definitely something TBSs can certainly do is kind of all the work behind the scenes to prepare somebody to go to a visit, to ask those questions, to share what's going on, to gather information. Absolutely would be appropriate, as a TBS. Clients may definitely need support, advocating for themselves with doctors or other providers. So this handout I think is great at capturing a lot of this information on a form that a person can then take to the appointment to feel prepared. So I think it's good to recognize the importance of the relationship that clients have with their doctor, psychiatrist, other providers, as being important in them going on their recovery journey, because together them and their providers can help find medications or other treatment options that reflect what they want, what they need, what they're comfortable with, what is good for them, and ultimately support their plans and their goals. Just a reminder, this handout 7.5 should be done before going to an actual appointment. So this may involve some role playing, modeling, working through this handout before the person goes to the appointment so they feel prepared to self-advocate about their own advocate about their own health and hopefully reduce some anxiety. So just some great questions that are suggested on handout 7.5 to go through with your client, letting your client know that it's important for their doctor to know about any changes in their symptoms, in their mood, in their behaviors that they may be experiencing, or concerns that they may have. When your client does ask questions, it helps the doctor understand their concerns. The doctor can then explain whether their concerns are even possible. Maybe they're worried about something that isn't even possible. So their answers can help ease your client's anxiety, even if the answer is not one that they were hoping for. So sometimes the fear of the unknown is worse than actually knowing the truth. And people who have anxiety, that may be preventing them from asking questions about their own health or their own mental health. So other questions to kind of go through with your client: support your client to figure out changes in symptoms, mood, or behaviors. How they've been feeling since their last appointment: better, the same, or worse. This again is a great way to model advocacy and have your client express what they've been feeling, and then hopefully independently tell their doctor or their provider how they've been feeling, better or worse since the last time. This is also a great way to kind of stay in your lane as a TBS. You don't have any control over their medication. You really cannot provide medication management, but what you can do is capture this information, write this information down, remind your client of maybe side effects that they've told you about that they could then bring up with their doctor. So kind of, you are not addressing the medical issues, but you're supporting them to address their own medical issues. TBS specialists are definitely qualified to do that portion of it, to assist clients in monitoring symptoms, side effects, triggers, improvements, and then support the client to communicate that to their doctor or their prescriber. Other kind of questions that are good to go over before the person goes to the doctor are listed here. What could I do to improve my overall health? How can medication help me reach my goals? Are there other treatments available if I don't want to take medication? So maybe kind of get the juices flowing. This is really brainstorming, maybe things that they haven't thought to ask in the past. So try that out, especially if your client is nervous or anxious about going to a doctor appointment, or if you've heard them say after they get back from an appointment, oh, I should have asked about that, or oh, I forgot to mention, this new side effect. That's a great way for a TBS to intervene and support a client to advocate for themselves. All right, we're getting short on time here, so I think I'm going to skip the scenario, but I will go on to documenting when it comes to advocacy. So this week, again, just like every other week, you're going to give a note attached to your quiz showing that you did provide the intervention of advocacy, or maybe you were developing self-advocacy skills. I just want to point out here that if the specific advocacy or self-advocacy activity that you engage the client in is not listed here, I know these are kind of vague and there's not very many listed here, just mention it in the client response box. Client's response to whatever the activity was is fine if it's not listed here. That's okay. But let's get your guys' take on what might be missing from this client response. So Marty, the client, verbalized an understanding on why it's important to advocate for himself. Marty stated, they remind me of my wife and they can't take care of me like she did. I think referring to some of the staff at the long-term care facility. So this is person-centered. We have Marty's name, we got a quotation, we have the word advocate in there, so we know what intervention was engaged in. But how could this be a little bit better? What is missing in this client response?
I think like more detail, it could go into more detail as to, why he thought that it was so important to advocate for himself. It does say like they remind me of my wife, but there's not a whole lot like information there.
Yeah, so the details are what's missing. Okay, I would agree. Anybody else? Any ways to make this more medically necessary or more maybe related to advocacy?
You can discuss their diagnosis or the symptoms.
Yeah. There's not a word in here about what his diagnosis is. There's not a word in here about symptoms. That's a great point. That's definitely missing for sure. So yeah, you guys got the basics here, what's missing, how to make it better. Very good. Let's do the same thing with his homework or his plan. So his plan is Marty will continue to work towards having a positive relationship with his female staff and advocating for himself while expressing his concerns. Again, that's person-centered. We got his name in there. We have a basic idea of what he's supposed to be doing, but how could this plan be improved upon? What's missing?
Specifics. Needs something specific he's gonna do.
Yeah, so how is he going to continue to work? Is he doing something? Is he saying something? What have we come up with to help him have a positive relationship? Is there a new skill that he's trying out? Is he using I statements? You know, what is it that's going to help him have a more positive relationship? And also, what is he even advocating for himself about? And what is it that the topic is that could be advocated for himself? So yeah, basically it's missing a lot of what, when, and why. So we know kind of when should he be advocating for himself and why is that important to Marty? So yeah, those details are important to let Marty know exactly what he is supposed to be doing to work towards having that more positive relationship with his female staff. Okay, all right. Well, we only have like 2 minutes left, so I just wanted to check in. Questions, comments, concerns about doing advocacy or self-advocacy with your clients this week? Anybody unsure what they might do? Anybody want any feedback on doing this as an intervention activity this week? Y'all got a client in mind? Hopefully, maybe one, maybe more than one. Okay. All right, well, same format as always. As soon as this video uploads and downloads, I'll send you the link to it. I'll also send you the link for the quiz. I'll send you the PowerPoint, and you know, please refer to the PowerPoint or any handouts as you need to, as you're doing advocacy or self-advocacy with your clients over the next week. And I will see you guys next week for week 8. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks.
All right, talk to you guys later.